you will go to the town of Blind River. Here is located one of the largest sawmills in Canada. The town is at the mouth of the Mississauga River on the north channel of Lake Huron. The road to this great pinery leads northwesterly through Iron Bridge to Tunnel Dam, then to Camp 4, near which is found the French Co-op and Camp 41, with numerous jobbers who are cutting logs in that great area. On the north, 91 miles, is the Abinadong Depot and many other camps. Logs by the million have floated down this watershed to end up as homes, as a pine producer. This is the Sawmill River, and it shows the mountainous country in the wintertime. Here you will find some of the finest pine that is left in the North American Abinadong Depot. This is the headquarters camp for the J.J. McFadden Lumber Company. And from here, many of the supplies are taken to jobbers and other camps in this region. Right near the depot, there is a little road turns off to Rennie Deshaw's camp. He is a jobber, and some wag has dubbed this Sausageville. This is typical of the lumberjacks of the area. Here we see Rennie Deshaw himself, the jobber, and Rennie's man, Mark Christolaw, who is an old-time lumberjack in this region. Mark is the woods foreman for Rennie. Early in the morning, soon after light, these boys go into the woods and start chopping the notch in the big pine trees. This is called fitting the tree. Once this notch has been chopped into the great pine, they take a hand saw and start sawing the tree down. This operation does not take very long. You see them sawing the tree here. Someone asked how long it takes. I think on the average 15 or 20 minutes would get this tree down. There she crashes. Perhaps the speed with which they cut these trees down and cut them up is due to the fact that they are working at piecework. After the tree is down, the first thing which is done is to trim the butt. All logs must be cut off evenly, and all trees must be cut up, whether they are good or bad. Here you see them measuring the tree. They're measured to 16-foot lengths, up to a 9 inches minimum diameter. Nothing below 9 inches is taken out of the woods because this is timber that is used for lumber. Someone said these boys look as if they're sawing pretty fast. They are sawing pretty fast. They're working for themselves. And the faster the saw, the more they get. Some of these pine trees, by the way, will run 6 16-foot pieces to the tree. That's a 96-foot tree. Pretty good-sized pine. The pine in this area is quite old. Some of it runs as much as 400 years of age. After these logs are cut and broken out here, the next operation is the skidding out of the logs. They come in here and skid them out of the woods with horses. Notice them coming down these very steep grades here in the mountains. The horse is slipping. Although they're roughshod, the log sometimes comes up on their heels. Once in a while they break a leg. Note them coming down this grade here, pulling these logs. Both horses and men become very clever in avoiding these logs. They know just when to go fast and when to go slow. Now watch these horses slip. Sometimes they kick each other. They may break a leg, they may fall down. Watch them slip. In spite of the very finest care, sometimes horses are injured. Here they are scaling the logs or measuring them to see how much lumber there is in each log and marking the log for both the jobber and also for the lumber company. This is called decking. They pull the logs up here in great piles, and then these logs are eventually pushed into the river. First thing they do, of course, is to measure this log. Cut out the 16-foot lengths before they start sawing it. Now the scaler comes along. He wants to know how many feet there are in this log. 460 lineal feet, it says in the book. So this log is scaled accordingly. A chain is fastened around it, and the horses pull it away and off toward the banking ground. The banking ground is on the Abinadong River in this case, and it's only about 200 or 300 feet away. Now this log, if you'll look closely, you'll see some bad spots in the log. It's still good enough for lumber. But Tom Nash is pointing out the bad spots. This boy is holding up his axe to show you which way this tree is going to fall. This is chainsaw cutting. It just happens that in this case, these boys are trying to earn themselves a farm. And they go into the woods and cut these trees and cut them very rapidly and saw them up. One man handles the whole operation. Another man skids them out to the riverbank. Clifford Horton, the cook, ringing the dinner triangle in the woods. And believe me, they're hungry. Just a moment, we'll go inside the cook shack here and see what's going on. Clifford Horton here, the cook, is pouring tea and soup. And in just a moment, you'll get a glance at the tables laden with food. See the food on these tables. No talking, remember. You come into this cook shack, eat, and leave. They're collecting the water here in these big tanks to ice the road. Late in the day, as the sun fades, these roads are iced for many miles. Here you see the great tank of water going along here, pulled by horses to the end of this strip that's being iced, and they don't turn the tank around. The horses are hooked on the other end of the tank, and they pull it back. In this particular case, they iced 5 miles of road. Part of this is done at night. The sun is behind the hills in this case, and they've already started to ice this piece of road. Here, this is a jammer loading a truck, and you get a good picture of the jammer itself there, sort of a tripod with a pulley attached and operated by a team of horses. You see how they place the hooks on these logs. And the jammer lifts them up on the load. The man who loads steers the log into place. Rather tricky business. You have to know what you're doing. You wouldn't want to set a log like that down on your toes, if you value your toes. This is a rather dangerous operation here, the pulling the logs out of the pile. Watch this log come down here now. You don't think it's going to hit this fella? Well, it didn't. But sometimes a person pulling those logs out may be caught in the jam, or a log may roll over sideways and hit him. They keep piling on the truck and piling on until the driver of the truck is satisfied that he has a load. He's paid by the number of logs hauled, so he wants to take as many logs as he can. Here again we have piecework. Truck moves rather slowly out of this woods road and onto the ice road here. Sanded on the curves. Sometimes they look as if they're going to tip over. There's a red flag to tell the truckman not to drive so fast on that curve. Here we are on the bank of the Mississauga River, a typical load of logs. Watch how they break out these loads. They have these chain hooks and they pound those out jump back to keep the logs from falling on them. Sometimes they come off all at once, like there. And they roll them out on the skids on the Mississauga. Log after log. In this case, 75,000 or more logs came out of the LaFoe Creek and LaFoe Lake area. In some places, these logs are piled 25 or 30 feet high. This is one of their high piles out on the Mississauga. Just a short distance from this camp is Camp 41. And this is a very cold morning, sunrise. 10 or 12 below zero, which is not unusual in that country. This is the main camp, 41, in a beautiful valley setting. Just over the hill is a nice little lake. The foreman of this camp is Larry Morin. There he is right there on the left. Larry's an old-timer up here. He's been in a good many lumber drives and a good many lumber camps. The bulldozer going out to work. Sometimes they break out the piles of logs with a bulldozer. On many of the lumber camps, the call to eat is handled with a triangle, but sometimes the cook might happen to have a horn. In this case, Chiblo Morin was the cook, and he had this big, long brass horn. We'll try to toot it, see what we can do with it. This is Larry Morin coming up to direct traffic on a big hill, just a short distance from Camp 41. The loaded sleighs are coming up here on the hill to have the cable of the crazy wheel attached. And we'll show you a close-up of how they attach this crazy wheel to the sleighs. Kind of an interesting process. They pull this cable up here and lock it onto the sleigh. Just like fastening a big lock on. In this way, they can snub the sleigh as it goes down the hill. There he is, tightening up the lock. There it goes. There's the crazy wheel at work, holding the load back. Now we'll go down to the foot of the hill in a moment, get a view of that sleigh and see what it looks like coming down the hill when you're down below. From the top, it doesn't look like much of a hill. But when you look up at it, if you were sitting on top of that load of logs, you might feel kind of funny when the load started to come over that hill, even if you did have a cable attached to you. Now here they are bringing out these sleighs from the yarding area down to the Mississauga River. 5 or 6 miles here, and you'll notice that this load of sleighs, or this truck rather, has 8 sleighs back of it. Probably 350 or 400 logs in that load. Hauling them down the ice road. And you may wonder what would happen in case one of those sleighs jumped the track. Well, I guess they have had 1 or 2 of them jump the track, and it generally shoves the truck out into the woods and wrecks it. They have hauled as many as 13 sleighs back of one truck up there, but the usual load runs from 6 to 8. Note that there are quite a lot of logs out there in the ice, some of the logs that were rolled in a little bit earlier. They're pulling this down to the area where they unload. In other words, the dump, they call it. It started to snow in this picture. Now watch how they come down on the ice of the river. "91 miles north of Blind River, Ontario, you come to the beautiful white pine in this part of the North American continent. Here you see one of those giant pine trees found on the banks of the Abinadong. And just a short distance away, you see the rollways where they are breaking out, which have accumulated during the winter. You may see a little pop of dynamite which breaks the ice and throws these logs into the river. And I want you to especially watch the left rollway here, because pretty soon you'll see a great big old pine log come tumbling down. It'll have a white spot on the left side of it, and you'll notice it when it falls into the river. It's part of a giant tree cut up there. There it is right there. The second log, or a log similar here, breaks when it hits a stump. That quite often happens, and the timber is ruined. This is a close-up where they're rolling logs off a low rollway, which is right along the bank. Look at the size of that timber. It's beautiful timber. These men here are what they call the river hogs. They get out and work in the water, roll these logs off of the shallow banks here, get them out of the brush, and start them on their way to the mill. Now here they're knocking the ice out from under these logs. Big chunks of ice still frozen in here where the logs have jammed. They finally get the log out and push it into the water. Takes a good-sized crew of men to roll heavy logs like that. You can see how high the water is because it's all up over the brush here. And it's quite a job to work on these jams and push the logs out into the fast-flowing Abinadong River. They're using a pike pole there. Some of them have peavies, others pike poles. There they are out on some floating logs. While we were in here, we were visited by a group of men from the States who were up looking at this logging operation. There was a retailer and a wholesaler in the group. And in just a moment, you'll see right there, the gentleman with the brown jacket is on a floating log, and that's Dick Fry. And he had with him a wholesaler by the name of Mr. Dean Cooperus from Flint, Michigan. And in a moment, Mr. Cooperus right here attempts to join him. Now watch him, watch him. He's going to step off the log and go right down to his neck. There he goes. Goodbye, Dean. Now you notice he has that peavy in his hand. And you'll soon see what happens to that peavy. He tries to bolster himself up with it. Is unsuccessful. Now, here come the lumberjacks to pull him out. Now be careful there. Hang on to that man. Watch out, he's going to fall. There he goes. Oh, they had a tough time. Remember, this water is ice cold. The lumberjacks pass a peavy over to him. These logs are all floating. They finally get ready to build a bridge here with pike poles so that the man can crawl up here. And now they get him up, they get him out of the water. They're lucky they saved him. That gives you an idea that it's quite a dangerous business to walk on floating logs unless you know exactly what you're doing, even if you are a wholesaler. Now we're going on in. This man needs some dry clothes, and it's the end of the day, and so we're going on up a very steep bank here and on up for supper. And you might be interested to know that the gentleman didn't suffer any bad effects. But when we did arrive at the camp, the lumberjacks here decided to present this gentleman with a big sucker. This is Bud Gillespie of the McFadden Company. It was a lot of fun, that is, afterward. Is really the beginning of the drive, the cookery tent here. Stove is being taken down and loaded on the boat because they'll have to do a little cooking as they go down the river. Down the steep bank here and on the boat. Fire is still going in the stove. You notice how they loaded on this pointer? It drops into place and those handles come off. They put the stovepipe up here, tie it to a stick. Other supplies are carried in boxes and placed on the boat. It takes a lot of cooking for a river drive. 65 men are employed during this river drive. You notice they already have some of the items on the stove. The beans are being cooked. The potatoes are ready. When this boat gets down the river to the mouth of the Abinadong, they'll have to have a hot lunch. Dishes. Here comes the meat. Takes a lot of food for 65 men. The cook, Clifford Horton, was cooking the entire drive. These are his helpers here. All kinds of silverware, supplies of every conceivable kind loaded on the boat, eggs, flour, cups. Here they are carrying the duffel down to load the duffel on the boat. 65 men have a lot of duffel. All kinds of bags and suitcases. Duffel bags of a great variety are loaded onto this boat, and then on top of this, all these blankets and things, they pile the tents and poles and everything that they need to camp along the river. Here they are bailing out the boat. This is a fire pump. They carry firefighting equipment right along with them. They can use it for several purposes. And here the cookery boat finally gets underway. It's important to get the cookery boat on down the river as soon as possible. There's the cookee standing in the boat with the cook. And so you can see the smoke coming out of the stove there, the top of the stovepipe, as the cookery boat moves off into the main part of the stream. I don't know whether you can see the steam coming out there or not, but he's salting the meat here, getting ready for lunch. And away they go, in snow and rain. It just happened to be a very bad day. Here's the boat with the tents and the duffel, moving out into the Mississauga and down toward the mouth of the Abinadong. Here they are at the mouth of the Abinadong. It's raining a wee bit here, quite chilly. The cook is standing by the stove here and watching the potatoes here. Looks like they're pretty near done. You'll notice it's raining in the background. See the water on the raindrops on the water, the beans there. Big pot of coffee in the background. Here the men come in to eat. Hot food is being served, as you can see here, and notice these boys put on a pretty good load. That's that meat that they're taking out there is beef, lots of potatoes, beans, good heavy food for hard-working men. The first drive of the Abinadong has reached the Mississauga. A gentle rain is falling as the men are served this lunch. I want you to particularly note that some of these men like potatoes. You see that gentleman in the background, he's just putting 5 potatoes on. He's an Irishman. That's Mike Gorman. You saw him a little earlier. Apparently the Irish like Irish potatoes. Mike did. Some of the same men year after year follow these drives. Here we are now coming down way beyond the Benedong near 40 Mile Rapids. You see Joe Boyer here rowing the boat down the Mississauga River. He's also known as Joe Bouillet. You can see how fast the water is here. Many logs in the rapids. The boats come zooming down here. They're in the upper rapids as you see them here. This is the Cookery Boat. The young gentleman there waving his hand is Cookie Campbell. They pass on through the upper rapids and come into the lower rapids and bounce around here as they approach. You can see how rough it is and how low to the water that boat is. They made it through here all right. Didn't seem to hit anything. Sometimes the boat gets sideways in the rapids, very difficult to handle in the fast water. And in the lower rapids, you're going to get a pretty good view of the... There you are. It looks like they're pretty near swamped here. The water is so rough. These boats are heavily loaded, but 2 men can handle the boat. But they need to be strong men. They're successful. They got through. Very rough water. You see an occasional log bobbing along there. Now here's the boat that didn't have such good luck. They're coming into the upper rapids all right. They managed to get through those. You see how rough the water is here. They go in there rather slow, head for the lower rapids. When they got into the lower rapids, they weren't quite as successful in getting through. Here they come. You watch them kind of close now. You'll notice that they bob along here, and suddenly they hit a rock in the rapids here, and the boat, it swings around. It's turning. They're trying to hold it, but they can't hold it. The boat swings and crosses the river and piles up against the log jam and sinks. Everything is wet. There they swing against the jam. And of course, as soon as they touch the jam, why, the boat filled with water. The 2 men crawled out on the jam here. These telephoto shots across the river will show you how they're taking the various articles out of the boat as rapidly as they can to try to keep them from being wet. The man running this boat, they're taking the van out here. The so-called van has all the supplies. There's cigarettes and gloves and all of the things that they may want to use during the drive. Dry socks. Everything that the men will want to buy during this river drive contained in the van. The van's about 3/4 full of water. See the boat's filling here, or is full of water. This young man who's taking those cans out there, they call him Bobby Socks. He's a very good boatman. Notice how this bulldozer backs up as the cable tightens here. The logs are pulled out of the rollway. and go floating down the river. It's necessary for someone to get out on those logs and retrieve the cable. Here's what happens to logs after those in front are pulled out. They go crashing into the river. Cable is picked up and taken back up to the rollway again. You see the man in the water there working with a pike pole to retrieve the cable. Or perhaps I should say the end of the cable, which contains the hook. He jumps ashore and the cable is carried on down to the rollway again, fastened around the logs. This goes on as they break the rollway and the logs are put into the water. Lumberjacks affectionately refer to the bulldozer as the bull. The bull has a lot of power, as you will notice when they pull out this particular rollway here. They fasten that cable out there and look at the number of logs that are moving out there. It's almost as many logs as Paul Bunyan would pull out at one simple yank. All kinds of logs. Here you see the backwater of the huge tunnel dam. The pulpwood is being ponded here as it is brought into the chute and put over a 240-foot head. It comes into the chute here and passes down about 1,000 feet. As you see it coming here, splashes into the tunnel below, and the pine takes the same course, and it's followed by the pulp. The large pine logs you saw in the previous picture take the same route down over this great dam. You see the pulp at the bottom there as it hits the water and jumps into the air, sometimes 25 or 30 feet. Now we're breaking a jam here above the Big Slate Falls. You notice the logs moving into the rapids here just above the Big Slate Falls. The men are off of the logs and here they come, piling on down through the fast water. Of course, it isn't as simple as that. Many of them jam and get tied up in the rocks. In just a moment, you'll see the men working on these logs, trying to pry them loose from the rocks, get them on down the river. Here's a log here that's giving him some trouble. Sometimes one or two logs jammed into the rocks like that make it very difficult to remove the rest of the logs. They have a crew of men pulling on this rope. Once they fasten it on, they try to shake it loose here, get it down through this little piece of rapids. It isn't as easy as it looks. You don't want to pull loose. Here they are working in the water below that little slide. Eventually they manage to get the log loose and on its way. However, sometimes logs have to be abandoned. They can't be pried loose in a reasonable length of time. They have to be left until higher water will sweep them on down the river. It may be the next year, however, before they arrive. Big Slate Falls is a very large waterfall located quite near a little back road. Has many visitors at certain times of year. This is a picture of the Big Slate and the logs going over the waterfall. You can hear its mighty roar for 2 or 3 miles on a good still night. See the logs down below the slate as they come into that fast water. Now we're at the Red Rock Falls. That's down the river a ways yet. They're out here working on this jam, trying to get the logs out. A few of them are pushed out, float into the Red Rock Falls. Here's a big log that's being pulled out of the jam. But this is also a bad jam and will need to be blasted. We'll have to have the powder man. There goes that log. And so more logs go tumbling into the river. Log jam begins to break. The logs hit fast water, and away they go on their ride to the mill. There are many sandbars in the lower sections of the Mississauga River. And here you see the log jams on some of these sandbars. In this area, the men and horses are able to get out in the water and pull these great logs off of the sandbar. However, they must have a rather healthy disregard for getting wet. They generally get wet in the morning and stay wet all day as they work these logs into the lower Mississauga, and we're getting closer and closer to the great sawmill at Blind River. Here is the mill at Blind River. You can see the logs here boomed up. That's the ponding area where the logs are held until they are sawed up in this great mill of the J.J. McFadden Lumber Company. This is a very large mill, I believe the largest pine mill in Canada. And the general manager of that mill will be on hand in just a moment. That's another view of the mill taken from one of the docks. The general manager on the right here, Mr. Ted Smith, and the superintendent, Mr. Kaufman. This is a close-up picture of Mr. Smith here. They have great lumbering operations in this country, and you'll see some of the logs here as they are being brought into the mill from the pond. Actually, the pond is a part of the north channel of Lake Huron. The logs are shoved into a ladder here by these men. We'll have to go up above and look down to see just what's taking place, because they're on the way to the saws. They're given a high-pressure shower bath to clean the sand off as they ride up this ladder. All the loose bark is knocked off also. They're moving in toward the great saws, and in a matter of a very short time will be converted into lumber. We'll take you inside of the mill in just a moment, and you'll have an opportunity to see how those saws work and how fast they work. You see the logs are skinned up a bit by their ride. They're still in pretty good condition. Inside the mill, a man rides a carriage, and that log is sawed, squared up here, the slab's taken off, and he flips the log around by automatic pressure machinery. The sawyer sits way off to the left. Perhaps you can just see the top of his head. It's rather dark in that mill. We had a combination of daylight and artificial light here. It was a difficult picture to make. After the timber is squared up, it's sawed up into the type of boards that are needed. There are two types of saws in this great mill. One of them is this large band saw, which is used with the carriage here. You notice the logs move onto the carriage. They're clamped down. Slabs are taken off. 2 slabs in that case. And the log is flipped around here by the sawyer to get the right location to saw the log to the best advantage. All handled by levers in the hands of the sawyer. He also has that chap up there on the carriage to look after. This carriage goes back and forth very rapidly. And so at last the pine is converted to lumber. Now here you see gang saws working. 6 great pine logs at one time come through and are cut into boards. Slide out here and go over on conveyor belts. They're sorted out, come on out of the mill, down these great conveyors, and through that tank where they are treated so that they will not be eaten by insects or ruined by mold. Here the boards are piled up as they come out on these conveyors in the lumber yard, and great carriers pick them up and carry them off, either to be dried outside or to be kiln dried, depending on the type of lumber which is used. You can see how these carriers work. We'll go over and take a look at the lumber which is piled out of doors for drying. Hauled away here. May go a quarter of a mile or a half a mile out into the yard. The yard must be well protected here against fire. Hydrants all over, electric circuits so that they can run this machinery. This is a piling machine. 2 men going up on top of the pile here, riding the machinery up. You'll see how this works. They place boards on the lower part of that traveling equipment there, and they're carried up to the 2 men working on top. This man leaves a load of lumber for them. These men are doing piecework here. You notice how rapidly they work. Boards are placed on the machinery, and up they go. On up over the pile, up the top, down the other side. And as they come down, they're picked off by the young men you saw in the picture, and you notice how rapidly they place them on the pile. Those aprons are to prevent them from being injured by that rough lumber. Now we're going to take a pile of lumber over to the shed where some of the better lumber is taken for finishing. And here the great crane up a whole truckload of lumber at one movement. Lumber is carried around in various parts of the shed. And here it is that the finishing is done. This company will convert lumber into almost any type of wood needed, from little sticks of lumber which go into shades to the largest type of timbers. Here you see them machining the lumber, piling it up. From here here's a very neat little piece of wood that's being cut up. The operators work here and pile it up. It's loaded directly on cars and shipped out to all parts of the United States. There goes a trainload of lumber. Huge freighters, like you see in this picture here, pull into the docks of the J.J. McFadden Lumber Company at Blind River and pick up this pine timber. The McFadden Company is one of the largest producers of white pine in the North American continent. You can see the timber here being picked up by the boat's large crane, and there's a lifting machine there that helps to load the pine. You can see here the lumber is being piled on, and they carry huge loads.